got to be kidding me. The world was more stable than it was 5 years ago. This is why, honestly, we don't concentrate on presidential speeches anymore, because blood shoots out of my eyes. Because I can't believe the Hollywood world we live in, where everybody allows him to get away with this. The world is more stable than it was 5 years ago? You mean like before Egypt was on fire? Before Egypt rounded up 50,000 Muslim Brotherhood clerics and outlawed the group? Really? You mean we're more stable now? Before 2 changes in Egyptian leadership within a year, including a military coup that we don't even know if you'll call it a coup or not? You mean more stable than when the Christian churches were burned to the ground and Coptic Christians were being massacred? Because these are the changes in Egypt, by the way, Mr. President, that you encouraged. The world is more stable now that we don't have a dictator in Libya? We don't like the dictator, didn't like him. But now Al-Qaeda is in charge of Libya, and the world is on fire there. We're more stable than we were in Syria, when Syria was stable, at least with a dictator. When the king of Jordan is begging everyone to pay attention because Jordan may disappear, really? We're more stable, Mr. President? My gosh. And you continue to aid through massive monetary contributions. You're telling us the world is more stable after all of that. The world was less stable before Libya burst into flames and 4 Americans were murdered in Benghazi. It was more stable when the world thought that we would actually go rescue our own people, that we wouldn't even the world's more stable now that they know that we won't even go and lift a finger to help people who are calling us and saying, help me, help me, help me. Really, the world is more stable. The world is more stable. You have the gall to say that? The world's more stable after Kenyan terrorists began rising up and murdering innocent people at shopping malls? The world was really less stable before the Syrian civil war, which hundreds of thousands of people have been killed. Chemical weapons were used because we destabilized the world, Mr. President. You said rise up, and they did. And now chemical weapons have been used. And the world is on the brink of World War III, and you have the gall to say it's more stable? Mr. President, you are far too intelligent for this. You know better than this, but maybe you don't, because everybody is afraid to say anything to you. So maybe you don't. Maybe you've never learned a lesson because nobody ever has the guts to say anything to you. Nobody will ever say, do you realize what you've just done? Do you realize what that speech just did? Do you realize what the ramifications are? Do you realize, Mr. President? No, instead everybody fawns over you and says you're the greatest leader to ever live. So maybe you don't. But I can't believe anymore that you're not just straight up lying, and you know it, because the entire Middle East is exploding in chaos, on the precipice of total disaster now 5 years later. Meanwhile, here at home, the dollar has been destabilized. Job growth is hundreds of thousands off the pace it should be. The economy has not recovered, continues to be the longest stretch of malaise since the Great Depression, not the 70s. I told you, I said to the American people 3 years ago, you will look back and you will dream of the days of Jimmy Carter. We have already blown past Jimmy Carter days. We're now struggling to not beat the Great Depression. You've saddled us with a new healthcare system which represents 17% of the entire economy. The greatest healthcare system the world has ever seen is now being described as a train wreck by its authors. And let's not forget, we're still pumping $1 trillion a year in made-up funny money into the system, setting up disastrous hyperinflation. Brazil has talked about it. China has talked about it. Africa has talked about it. All of our allies have talked about it. Russia, China, our enemies have all talked about it and said, you will destabilize the world and you will cause the world to go hungry and starve to death because everybody uses our dollar as their gold standard. and you've destabilized that when millions of people starve to death because the United States of America devalued its money, and the world keeps good on their promise to blame it on us because they already are. Look at what the IMF said. The IMF has already come out and said, you can't stop printing anymore. You can't stop now because you're already hurting all the other countries. You stop printing now, you'll throw everybody into chaos. Let me understand this. Is that really your idea of stable, Mr. President? Is that really what you think is stable? Because to quote the Princess Bride, you keep using that word, and I do not think it means what you think it means. And as always, while addressing foreign diplomats and leaders, he again showed his true innermost feelings about our country.
Yeah, the notion of American empire may be useful propaganda, but it isn't borne out by America's current policy or by public opinion.
Wow. Wow. Could he put it any more clear? Could he? Really? Could he put it to you and the rest of the world any plainer than this? This notion of the American empire isn't borne by America's current policy. What president would ever say that? What? That's a tactic admission that in the past we have been, in fact, an American empire, an imperial nation. Will anyone ask the president that question? Is there a single journalist that will ask him? Or his trained lying minion, Jay Carney, which is a joke. If Jay Carney would be in any other position for any other president or any corporation, no one would let that stand. If that guy was representing Exxon, Exxon would be selling soap today. Don't hold your breath for anybody asking the question, because they're not going to. It won't happen. Instead, let me ask this question of 50% of our countrymen. I don't care what anybody has ever said about me. I was against George W. Bush. I thought he was, by the end of his term, I was just beginning to see what was going on. And I began to see the lies, and I began to see the mistakes that I had made, and saying, yes, let's destabilize, because they were lying to us. They weren't doing what they said. We were going over there to punish them, get the bad guys, and come home. That's not what we were doing over there. They lied to us. And if you think that we were for that, maybe some were. I wasn't. I don't know anybody who was. I don't know a soul in or out of the military or in or around the military that is for what we're doing. They weren't for it when we got in the end of George W. Bush. We're like, we've been lied to, all of us. Let me ask you something. Where are you? Where are you? When will you have the basic human dignity and decency to stand up and denounce? I don't care if you denounce this man or denounce your vote. I don't care. You denounce what's going on. You stand up and say, no, not in my name. When? For the sake of our lives, our children, our God, our liberty? When will you finally wake up and say, I can't be a part of this? Not in my name. Not in my name.